Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Welcome back to the OT is In. In this episode, my guest Gina Taylor, fellow homeschool mom and occupational therapist, explains the world of hippotherapy, which is the use of horseback riding as a therapeutic treatment. Gina explains the different types of equine therapy, particularly focusing on hippotherapy and its role in promoting success in the functional day-to-day tasks that a child needs and wants to do. Gina breaks down aspects of hippotherapy to address motor skills, social skills, and cognitive skills, and shares insights on the academic ties, including working with the POWER framework. Finally, Gina explains some logistics of hippotherapy, including how parents can navigate insurance coverage and what to look for when finding a therapist near you. I'm really excited you are here and are going to benefit from the expertise of this fellow homeschool mom and OT. So without further ado, here's Gina. In episodes 25 through 28, you will hear us touch on response inhibition and the many ways the skill is required. Safety awareness in play, and especially on screens. You'll also hear some ways to help build the skill, like in equine therapy, and you'll hear how to prepare for an emergency or a disaster. Preparations are important for all, but require more emphasis when considering sensory needs and executive functioning skills. If any of these resonate with you, there's an additional resource at Homeschool OT. We've made a games list so you can be intentional about adding fun to your homeschool day, knowing that you're also addressing executive functioning skills. You can find this in the Homeschool OT shop or in the show notes for each of these episodes. And for further support in the area of executive functioning, we have the Executive Functioning Focus Group. This is a month-long deep dive into each of the 11 executive functioning skills. Each week, you'll have bite-sized chunks to grow your understanding, but also how to help build the skills, adjust the environment to support your children, and even ways to adapt activities. After all, we want our expectations to match our children's abilities. For those of you worried about dedicating a month to this topic, don't worry. You have lifetime access, so you can come back as your time allows or as your child develops and you need to, again, match your expectations to their new abilities. So you can find out more about the focus group at homeschoolot.com, or more specifically, homeschoolot.com/shop/executive function focus group. Now, on with the show. So hello, welcome back to the OT is In. Today I have with me Gina, who works, actually I found her from an article that was published when I was looking for someone who works through equine therapy, and then now just found out that she's also a homeschooling mom. So Gina, can you just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us, one, your homeschool journey, but then also what led you into this specific part of occupational therapy?
Sure. So I'm Gina Taylor. I am an occupational therapist and hippotherapy clinical specialist. And this has been my life's path since I pretty much was a kid. I did 4-H with horses and volunteered to offer my horse to the Special Olympics and got to see the benefits that horses could bring to kids with special needs. And I always knew that was the direction I was going to go. So my undergraduate degree is in equine studies. My graduate degree is in occupational therapy. And working in that setting, I worked in a nonprofit for 20 years. And we would often have homeschool students who were volunteers during the day because they were available. And I always noticed how kind the homeschool volunteers were, how considerate they were, how different they were from their peers that came later in the afternoon in the after school hours, because of course the public school kids often needed to come, or private school kids, they often needed to come for community service hours. And so I just noticed there was a huge difference in between the two groups of teenagers. And so that really got me thinking about, I'd really like my kid to be more like the first group of kids than the second group of kids. And so I started learning more about homeschooling. And when our daughter was born, my husband and I agreed that we wanted to homeschool. And luckily, our parents were also supportive. So the grandparents are supportive.
Mm.
Yeah, this has been the path and the plan all along. So for us, it's worked out really well. And it's allowed us a lot. Like our job allows us flexibility, but then homeschooling also allows us flexibility. So it's worked out really well.
Yeah. So are your kids involved in your practice now?
Not yet because they're still quite young, although my
Okay.
daughter is saying she's going to start a nature club. And because part of our
Absolutely.
occupational therapy practice is nature based. And so she's been practicing running little mini groups with her brothers. And I have to be really sure not to lose any of the kids. And I was like, yeah, you got to work on that.
Oh, good for her. I see what you do over here, mom, and I'm going to do it too. That's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
What great role models. Yeah, we actually started when at the very beginning of homeschooling, we volunteered at a horse farm near our
Mm-hmm.
house. My daughter at that point was 8, I want to say, all the way down to my youngest was 1. And I have so many pictures of him walking around. My dad built him his own little wheelbarrow, and so
Mm-hmm.
we would walk around and we were shoveling and mucking and whatever and doing that. But yeah, just a great volunteer experience. Oh, so great. So now I know that there's different types of equine therapy. Can you define that kind of for us and what the difference between them would be?
Absolutely. So typically, equine therapy actually refers to doing therapy for the horse.
Okay.
And on the people side of things, we have adaptive or therapeutic horseback riding, which is riding lessons for kids that maybe need a little extra support or they need something adapted in the teaching style. And then there's equine assisted psychotherapy, so the mental health side of things when you're working with horses. And then hippotherapy generally refers to what a physical therapist, occupational therapist, or speech language pathologist would do when incorporating horses.
Okay, so when you are, and you're primarily doing hippotherapy, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so as OTs, we can really break down activities often in terms of motor skills and social skills and cognitive skills, the big three.
Hmm.
So, how do you, when we're thinking about hippotherapy, how do you break that down?
Sure. So I'm looking at the child right from the moment they get out of the car. I'm looking at the way that they move, regardless of what their diagnosis is, because often kids that are struggling with some of the higher level executive function, cognition skills also have some very subtle movement pattern differences. They don't have that rotational component where everything is integrated really nicely. I might see some sensory differences that are then affecting those higher level cognitive and academic skills. And so I'm looking for those because I want to pair the horse's movement with what the child is missing. So if I see like they have a lot of movement in one plane, but they don't have a lot of that rotational movement yet, I'm going to choose a horse that's going to give that to them so we can start to address it. And this is all very subconscious. It's just giving the body some of what it needs.
Interesting. So, in your therapy specifically, like how many horses do you have that you would choose from?
So I partner with two different facilities. One is an able-bodied riding facility, and they probably have over 20 horses. Not all of those are appropriate for therapy. So out of those, I probably have 4 or 5 that I use regularly. And I also partner with a therapeutic riding stable. And same out of that facility, I may have about 6 to 8 that are appropriate for therapy.
And what makes them appropriate for therapy?
Sure. Some key characteristics. One is medical quality equine movement. So rather than what they might use in a riding lesson, I need something that it has a higher level of quality in rhythmicity, in symmetry, because those types of things are, again, what I need to impart to the child. And then temperament, most of the horses that are used at a therapeutic or adaptive riding stable have the temperament that I need, but at the able-bodied stable, some of those horses don't have the right temperament. So I'm looking for that temperament ability to handle some of the differences that my clients might have.
Interesting. So when you're saying you pair so that the horse will make the movements that the child actually needs, can you describe that a little bit more? Give me kind of a story and example.
Sure. So there's the kind of the very classic example of a child with autism who is rocking a lot. And so we know that they're moving very much in that linear plane. And maybe they haven't, if we think about the developmental sequence from moving anterior posterior in that linear plane to starting to move lateral and start to weight shift. And so if they're really stuck here, I might provide a horse that's very lateral, that's going to start to get that weight shift and then hope to progress to that rotation. So if I see a child that is doing really well and they have a lot going on, but maybe that bilateral integration isn't so good, that's where I'm going to look for that horse that gives that rotational movement. And I'm going to then pair that with activities that are timed with the movement where they're then crossing midline.
Wow. So are there motor skills that kids absolutely must have before they would start equine therapy? Or nope, not equine therapy. You already told me what it is. Hippotherapy.
If it depends partially on the age. So for small children, they don't need to sit up. They don't necessarily need to have head control if they're working with a therapist because we can accommodate them with positioning. But as children get bigger and
Mhm.
taller, then some of those handling things, they may need to at least have some head control because we may not be able to do all of the supine laying down positioning with them as they get older. And then as we get to our teenagers, definitely some sitting balance because again, at that point, they may be a little bit heavier and larger to keep safe on the
Mhm.
horse if I have to do a lot of positioning. So that's usually somebody who has a more significant physical disability. On the cognition side of things, some basic safety awareness and ability to follow like a single step direction for our teenagers. Again, with the younger kids, we have everyone wears a safety belt, so a gait belt. And for those folks who are elopers or have trouble, you're right there. And as long as they're of a size that I can manage, that's fine. But for my teenagers, they need to at least have some basic safety awareness and the ability to follow a one-step direction.
Oh, so that kind of brings up because this month on the podcast, we are focusing some on executive functioning skills and
Mm-hmm.
especially the safety awareness and response inhibition. So when we say response inhibition, meaning that we see something right away, we can stop. Example, when oven is hot and you put your hand, you're not going to automatically touch it. You can have that pause or that waiting before you have your response or your action. As far as safety awareness goes, how do you work through that with hippotherapy?
Yeah, a lot of clients have safety awareness and community goals
Mhm.
because families want to go out in the community. They want to be able to go to the library or go grocery shopping. And those impulsivity things are really scary if you
Yeah,
don't know that your child's going to bolt across the parking lot in a busy shopping center. And the farm is nice because there's an element of controlled risk and that opportunity to like, we walk in the barn. You need to walk. We
yeah,
have things that are sharp. So we need to use some awareness. So we'll do a lot of making a snack for the horse. And so we can use a knife, right? We might use a butter knife, but we're using a knife, right? So we need to have good safety awareness in where we put our hands and do we have the right environment? We have a table that we're working on and working through those things. So in some cases, the environment gives feedback or gives constraints and boundaries. Other times, if we're on the horse, often the horse will help give us some of those boundaries. So kids who have more issues with body awareness or sensory seeking, and they just see something again that they're very interested in. I want to do this, right?
right,
And they're ready to go and they have that impulsivity. The horse will often give feedback in that they may stop and refuse to move
right.
because you're moving around too much. You're not sitting still. And so as the therapist, it's my job to interpret the horse's behavior and help the child then understand that their actions are part of what's going on with the horse.
The horse.
So I want a horse that is going to give me some responses
Right.
So I can give that feedback. And often the children are much more open to the horse's feelings and responses
Yep.
than they are to mine.
Wouldn't that oh, that's so interesting. So when you're saying that you're interpreting, is that you're using language? Or are you showing the body or and what the horse is doing? Or how does that actually work?
Yeah. So sometimes it's just the physical sensation. Brownie stopped. Oh,
Yeah.
where are you? And the kids pick up pretty quickly. Oh, I was moving around again a lot. I really need to sit still. I need to find that center. Other times for that very much higher level function, we might say, perhaps looking off into the distance. What do you think's going on there? Do you see anything Brownie might be afraid of? Have you ever
Mm,
felt afraid of something? What did you do? How could we help Brownie feel more confident? And so we
and
do some of that social emotional work,
that's what I was
like,
gonna say. So
yeah.
that totally brings in the social skills that we were
Hmm.
talking about of, the motor skills, cognitive and social skills. So can you walk me through just a sample session? So because you've mentioned you make snacks for the horses and you're riding the horses. What is a general kind of routine or rhythm that it might look like?
Yeah. So typically we come in, we may have a beginning activity that we're doing in the equine environment in the stable. So like body mapping, right? So we might do some body mapping. You come in, we're going to bring out your body map. We're going to say like, how are you feeling today? Let's draw it on your body map. Let's write in where you're at right now or color it in if you can't, if we're not to the writing part, or kids that just don't like to write, we can do
Right.
stickers. We're going to put something on the body map. Then we're going to get our helmet and our safety belt on. So we're going to work on those fine motor skills for clasping, unclasping, donning and doffing, getting ready, and also working on the sequencing of doing it so
Mhm.
that they can be more independent. Then we're going to greet our therapy team. So often we have occupational therapy students, we have a horse handler, we have the therapist, we have the horse. And so we have that, let's say hi to everybody. Then we're going to do our transfer. So we're going to transfer either from a mounting block, so some stairs or a platform. And we have a motor planning piece, again, that
Mhm.
sequencing. And then it's really about what do I think they need? Do they need a lot of movement? Do they need a transition period? So we might take 5, 10 minutes of walking around. Sometimes I'm asking, like, what did you do today? Or how was your week? Building some rapport and finding out like how well are they able to do in self-reporting and letting
Mhm.
me know. I've worked with some kids, like they can't even tell me what they did this morning. And that's really hard for their academics because they're not able
Right.
to carry things over. And so when the family has concerns about their ability to build on skills, I'm starting to see there's some issues with their memory in their executive
Yeah.
function. And that's an impact there. So as we get moving, then we're going to start overlaying either different movement activities. And a lot of this is very like observation, react, observation, react. So I'm seeing like, is their arousal level increasing? Are they better able to answer questions? Are they starting to disclose more personal things if it's more of a mental health treatment session? Are they ready to talk about some of the challenges that they're having? Are we now ready to start doing some dual tasking? So we might be pairing some of the letters around the arena with some tasks or actions. And then as we get to a really good point, and I feel like they're well regulated, then we actually get off the horse and we do a functional activity. So we might go back to that body map and talk about more of a zones of regulation and where are you and what skills could you use when you're not feeling good, or has your body map changed since you came?
So, also as OTs, we think about occupation as a means and occupation as an end. And I love the way you just said we come back to the functional task. Because why, the majority of the time, I would say most people are not coming because they want to become equestrians, right?
Mhm.
So, what would be some goals that you are helping them to meet using hippotherapy as your medium?
Yeah, so all of the same clinical goals that we would be writing up in a regular clinical setting are the same ones we're working on in the equine environment using the movement of the horse. We're just using different activities to meet those same goals. So we have things like follow a 3-step routine, be able to get ready independently in the morning, have transitions without meltdowns, be able to organize their like schoolwork, be
Mhm.
able to sit in a chair for 20 minutes, be able to follow multiple step directions, be able to use coping skills with an adult, be able to de-escalate emotional situations with adult, be able to start doing pet care or IADLs at home. It really runs the gamut. And those are ones
Yeah.
I think are probably most applicable to those in the homeschool community.
Right.
Certainly, again, kids that have more significant physical disabilities, they are more related to, they're able to sit up at the table to join their family for mealtime, or they're able to sit on the couch so they can watch a movie with their sibling. Like those are all real goals that clients of mine have had.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. And homeschoolers, oftentimes we think about education as our whole lifestyle, right? So just being able to participate in this type of activity and the surrounding and the way that you've mentioned nature and being able to look at that as far as self-regulation and all of that. But sometimes we need more explicit explanation as far as how can this tie in directly to academics. Before we go on, I want to take a second to thank you for being here. Many of you started listening to the OT is In podcast after hearing some of my sessions during the convention season in June. I am so thrilled that you are all here, and I so appreciated your feedback. One person, after attending my session, Help My Child Won't Sit, gave feedback to the Virginia convention saying, "I wish we had more time with her. This was such a blessing." Well, here I am. And another person said, "I loved the tips and tricks. I can always use more." So here's another tip, especially for those of you whose children learn better with the ability to move. We've used CTC Math for a few years now. Each lesson is short and engaging, allowing for movement before and likely after. One of my sons completes his math lessons after completing his chores, which provide him with the pushing, pulling, carrying, or crawling, all the activities we OTs call proprioceptive feedback or heavy work. Then he sits on a sit disc or on a balance ball, and since all lessons are online, he moves wherever he feels the most comfortable. He's engaged in the lesson, and then a short time later is up and moving again with a better understanding of math. So if you're looking for short yet effective, colorful, engaging lessons, CTC Math is a perfect addition to your homeschool. Now, back to the show. Now, you did say a little bit about the sequencing that you would, what comes first, second, and third, and how that might play in even to mathematics in our own writing. But are there other academic ties that hippotherapy plays into?
Yeah, so we use frequently the POWER framework. So it's one of the executive function frameworks. And so it stands for plan, organize, work, evaluate, and reward. And so we'll have that child come in, they'll plan what they want to do for their session with the horse. They're going to have to organize all the materials. So that might be setting up an obstacle course, getting the grooming equipment. They're going to then execute that activity, so do the work. And then we're going to sit down and we're going to get out our journal. We're going to evaluate how well did it go? What could have went better? Did we put everything away? Did we clean up? And then as the reward, often that's where they want to give the horse a treat or they want to just spend a little extra time with the horse. So what we help families do is then take that same framework that the child is using with the horse, where it's an extremely motivating environment, and bring it home, right?
Right.
Because they have that opportunity to practice the steps and they're really motivated to do it with the horse. Now, when we're doing something that's hard, like handwriting or
Mhm.
getting through our lesson in the morning, then we can say, oh, remember with Miss Gina, you were, what do you need to do is your plan. Let's sit
Right.
down, let's get our plan together for the day. And so families are able to tie those things in together, and it helps that carryover because we know we have the motivator when we're in that equine environment and we can get to that really regulated place. And so then we work on pairing. What do you have in your home that can help mimic some of the things that I'm doing with the horse's movement for self-regulation or for attention and focus?
I love the way that you're working with parents and talking about how to carry this over at home. What are some specific questions? As obviously, you can't take your horses everywhere to go meet all of our homeschooled families around the world. So, what are some questions that parents should ask if they're thinking about finding hippotherapy for their children?
Yeah. So the first thing is finding out what type of therapist you're working with. Is it an occupational therapist, physical therapist, or speech language pathologist? Because again, the term equine therapy is sometimes thrown around and there's no regulation around it. Whereas hippotherapy is in the United States is specifically to OTPT and speech. And so you want to know that you're working with a therapist if you're looking for therapy. If you're looking for
Right.
riding lessons, that's a different kettle of fish. But if you're looking for therapy, you want to find a therapist. So that's the first question is, are you a
Who are
therapist?
you?
And then the next is, what training have you done? And so the American Hippotherapy Association offers a hippotherapy clinical principles course, a treatment principles course, and that comes in a part 1 and a part 2. After that, a therapist can sit for a certification. And so there are 2 levels of certification. There's a AHCB registered therapist, and then there's what I am as the hippotherapy clinical specialist. And so somebody can be competent anywhere through that process. They've taken the training, they've taken the certification, or they're a clinical specialist, but you want to know that they've had some sort of training.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we can provide some links to, is there like a registry or something of,
You can look up,
okay,
yep, find a
perfect.
therapist.
Perfect. So we will find some links for that to make sure that are posted in the show notes and also about the power framework, because that
Yeah.
is a fantastic framework to carry over into the home. So I'm sure that there are people that are saying, this is amazing, yet they're trying to figure out logistics and whatever. So is hippotherapy, is it frequently covered by medical insurance?
Depends on your state and it depends on your particular policy. So there are some nationwide companies that have a long-standing exclusion
Okay.
for, it could be hippotherapy, it could be animal assisted therapy. So it's not simply enough to call your company and say, hey, is hippotherapy included? Because hippotherapy is the tool, it's not the therapy.
Right.
So what I counsel my clients to do is call your insurance company and say, do you cover occupational therapy? And then I tell them to ask for a copy of the written exclusions to their policy.
Mhm.
And so if they get a copy of the written exclusions, we can just go through it together. Is it excluded or is it not? And then after that, then we would know whether it's excluded or not. A lot of us are private pay. So
Yeah.
we're private pay, and then we can provide super bills for families that are going to then seek out of network coverage. But there are more and more states that the Medicaid exclusions are being taken out.
Oh.
Yes.
Well,
So,
that's fantastic.
yes.
I was about to say, yes, it's so hard. But no, you're saying taking
They're
out.
taken out. Yes. The American Hippotherapy Association, they're going state by state and
Yeah.
working with these groups and really explaining who we are, what we do, how we bill, so that they can have a better understanding of what it is. Because hippotherapy has really been around for a very long time. And there
Mhm.
is a huge research backing behind not just in the US, but internationally. And when the insurance companies understand that it is not a horseback riding lesson, that it is therapy provided by a medical professional, they
Right.
generally have a much better understanding.
Fantastic. And so, what are some of your favorite resources if families were like, I just want to find out a little bit more before I would go and explore this for my child?
Yeah. The most reliable source is the American Hippotherapy Association, and they have a little like PowerPoint training for caregivers, so for parents
Mhm.
and caregivers. And that's probably one of the better resources because unfortunately, when you Google hippotherapy, it's really a mishmash of terminology, of best practices, worst practices. So sticking with the source is definitely one of the best resources because you can go right from there to then that find a therapist and know that you're getting someone who has been trained, who values doing it within the safety constraints and that side of things.
Fantastic. And we will make sure that is all linked in the show notes for sure. So, where actually could someone find you if they were like, wait, I think I might be nearby?
Yeah. So I'm in New Jersey and my private practice is Opona Therapy Services. And we see clients in the surrounding community, but there are a lot of therapists all across the country at, like I said, able-bodied riding stables, because that's certainly a question that some of the kids that I've worked with have had when they are maybe struggling with some of those executive function skills, but they may not even have a diagnosis. And if they're going to the therapeutic riding center, sometimes they're like, but why am I here?
Why? Yeah.
And so that's been a benefit to me when I'm at the able bodied riding center because they're just like every other kid that's there.
Yeah, that can be really helpful to make sure that we're fitting in with the whole community
Hmm.
around. I love that so much. Gina, thank you so much for being here and for sharing. You packed so much expertise into this short amount of time. So I will make sure that there are plenty of links
Yes,
and show notes that people can go back into further research, and also make sure that your article, the same way that I found you, your article is there too, so others as well can find you. Thank you so much
perfect.
for being here.
Absolutely. I loved it.